Welcome to our webinar about peak season do's and don'ts. I'm Outi Karppanen. I'm the lead marketing analytics strategist, which is a long title to say, but basically marketing industry lead. And I joined Supermetrics about 5 months ago from a media agency, and I have over 10 years of media agency and digital marketing background.
All right, and my name is Peter. I'm a senior solutions engineer at Supermetrics, originally from the Netherlands, work here at the Helsinki headquarters. And I generally really help our customers, right, by first understanding where they are in their marketing analytics journey, see where they want to go, and then kind of help bridge that gap, right, with technical solutions or just use cases. And in my time at Supermetrics, I've worked with hundreds of brands and also agencies. So hopefully I have something useful to add today. Let's get into it. So what we want to make sure we bring to you today is making sure, right, we understand peak season. So what peak season means for you, for instance, some data-driven strategies that help you stay on top of it all, some hands-on demos of what we think you should do before, during, and after peak season, right, to maximize, right, the planning phase, make sure we stay on top of the ball, but then also make sure that we gather those learnings and we activate more value, for example, for next peak season. Then we'll do some key takeaways, and then we'll have a Q&A after to make sure that we answer all of your questions to the best that we can.
And if throughout the session you have any questions, you can pop them into the Q&A section of the platform we're using. But let's first start with a quick poll. What does peak season mean to you? So we're going to launch a poll and answer. There's preliminary choices that you can make. Answer what are those relevant to you, because we love to see how you define peak season for yourself. So we can see the results live from the votes. Oh, do I need to? Let's just vote.
Yeah,
Great.
Let's see some results.
Christmas, popping up a lot of answers. Also interesting, the other. So you can comment in the chat what other we forgot to list and what other do you think of as peak season. Yeah, Black Friday gaining a lot, and yeah, Christmas as well. So as we saw, it's not just contained to just a few days or a month. The reality of it, it's much more complicated. So it's a journey that stretches from October to early January, and to some of you it might already be like mid-August, early September with back to school season. But realistically, it's Halloween could be interesting to some of you, but then we go into Singles Day. That's huge in some markets. Finland, it's on a limited, but still it is a peak season theme here. Then a few weeks after that, Black Friday. And it's not just Black Friday anymore, it's a Black Week. Some are advertising already 2 weeks before that Friday. So Singles Day and straight on we go to Black Friday. Cyber Monday, and immediately after, Christmas shopping. It's holiday seasons, advertising is starting already. And depending on which market you're in, you might be celebrating on 24th or 25th as the pinnacle. And after that, sale season, which I love personally as a shopping addict, and New Year's, and then it's the whole new year, new me, healthy start to life, and up to probably mid-January. And we all then living through that and just one after the other. And you can see that from Google Trends, for example, and you can check your own categories and products and genres that are interesting to you and check when does the peak season actually start for those categories. Here's just a general example of gifts and then Black Friday. And we can see that even Black Friday, it starts earlier on in November and then peaks, of course, to the Black Friday season. And then Christmas just rolls throughout that, the early research, and then start to top into the actual Christmas day. So it is a lot of research that people are doing. And the reality for all of you who are probably doing peak season marketing is it's a pressure cooker. And competition is fierce, so everyone is trying to get the same audience to buy. And also your customers are expecting a lot from you. They want the best deals and free delivery or like the awesomest products ever and bundles. So that's a lot of pressure to deliver. And also you might end up in a data overload, that you have so much data and you don't know what to do. And with the reality of just that season and so much to do, it can lead to team burnout. And we hope none of you end up sitting in that room with the fires going around and just like emptiness in your eyes. We want everyone to be good to go for peak season. And the key thing is, don't panic. It's a lot. But your secret weapon for peak season success is data. And that's a lot of the things we're going to talk about today.
All right. So with that said, we'll get into the section of what we think, or we generally see done before peak season starts, and that is planning, right? Just making sure that we have the right strategy going into peak season and that we know what we can expect, right? And we like to start with basically saying, okay, do you have your data foundation set up, right? Because data is what we need to make those decisions and to look into those reports and everything that will make our life easier during peak season. And the way we like to go about this, right, really say first that, okay, do we have our data collection in place? And of course, you can go to Google Analytics, to Meta Ads, to the platforms that you use and look at the data directly. And that's usually fine, just get a quick insight. But especially when we're starting to think about the things we'll show soon, you'll actually need all of those things in one place to get an insight out of that. So we start with collecting the data. Then we want to integrate that through a automation platform, right? Just to make sure we get everything in one kind of format. And then there are different ways that you can then use that data, right? So the first one you see here, that we call on demand, and that's what most of the customers or people that use Supermetrics or another automation tool, they'll know that, okay, I have an Excel sheet or a Looker Studio dashboard. I can pull the data directly from these platforms into my report and have actionable insights from there. The second way you can work with this is by pushing this data into a storage solution from which you can do some modeling. Both of these has a place, and we'll talk about that in a second. But they then power those use cases that we're going to talk about in a bit. So essentially, to solve for these problems, we have two definitions of how this data is used. We touched on it briefly, but basically we want to start with on-demand data. Like I said, this is probably what we're most known for and what most customers think about when they think, okay, marketing data automation. These are really made for the hands-on marketers. So we're thinking like day-to-day use cases, things like budget pacing and other things we'll touch on. Very easy to deploy, very easy to start with, very nice solution to use, especially during peak season. But then we'll talk also about centralized data. And this is really where we then store this data into, for example, a data warehouse or a data lake. And the purpose of that is to make sure we build up a data store. We can put data together in ways that's very difficult by doing it in a spreadsheet or a BI dashboard. And this gives us then both the retention, right? So we can look at previous seasons and make decisions based on that. But we can also then do measurement or modeling to predict better and plan scenarios, for instance, for the next peak seasons. We think that both have a place, and we'll go through those individually as we kind of move through the session today.
And the next step after you have your data foundation is, do you have your campaign goals set up? Do you know what your goals for the season are? And probably a lot of you know about the SMART goals, meaning they need to be specific, they need to be measurable. So we want something quantifiable and not just a gut feeling, which is nice sometimes. Achievable, aim high but not overly ambitious. Relevant to that peak season and your business, and then timed correctly. And how do you then know what data to collect for these? Well, my recommendation is start from the ending in a way. What are the questions you want answers to? What are the questions you keep getting asked? Like, what are the best performing channels or which creatives work the best. Then go into what measurement plans will give you those answers. So it could be multi-touch attribution, last click attribution, MMMs, or it could be your ad performance analysis or any other like on-demand measurement. Then go, what data do I need to do those measurements? So it could be that, hey, I need all of the online and offline data. I need the performance data, sales values, conversions, so that I can do these calculations. So start from the ending and work your way back to the beginning to figure out what data do I need to collect? What measurement plans do I need to come up with to get answers to those questions that I'm getting bombarded? And I used to work in a media agency, so there's so many questions that people ask, how are these things performing? And thirdly, once you sort of know your goals, you know what data you need to collect, then you of course need to develop your peak season strategy and your media plan. We're not gonna instruct you on how to do planning, but it is key to prioritize key elements like maybe offline channels or takeovers. So my recommendation is to like have these fixed and confirmed elements that you need. For example, if you want to do a Black Friday display takeover on a certain site that is crucial to you, book that in, that budget is set, you're good to go. And book those as soon as you know that you need to have them, because they can sell out in some markets. But then have other things flexible, like it could be different social media channels, it could be your search budget, your programmatic. Have like an idea of what you want to spend, and then seeing how it performs throughout your peak season or different campaigns throughout the peak season, do some adjustments, allocate like, hey, actually that channel is performing great, I'll just allocate my budget. But how do you go about creating this plan from zero? If you like haven't yet looked at your data, you actually need to do some planning.
Exactly. And with that said, so well put, Outi. We'll give a short example, right, of a demand forecasting. You should be able to see this on your screen now. So basically what we're showing here is it's a Google Sheets report. And just want to say this with some context. So you can go as simple and as complex as you want with this. So in this example, right, we have basically said, okay, here are some of the online channels that we invest in. Here is that start date and end date of the period that we want to take our historical data from, right? So what you see on the top side here is what was our peak season last year? Could have been 20 days, could have been 5 days. It depends on what your peak season is. Let's collect data from that peak season. This is our investment on the green side. And then these are the results in terms of sales and conversions. And then, of course, return on ad spend, that could be provided by the platforms themselves. You can have your own built attribution model, or you can go as far as doing predictive modeling, scenario building, things like MMM. For the sake of this example, we just have our investments in our results. We can see our return on ad spend was close to 1. And if we reallocate some of the budgets, and as Outi said, like, we're not going to do an in-depth session on planning, but essentially what the outcome of this should be is like, hey, we have allocated our budgets in a way that optimizes our return on ad spend based on previous year's performance. So based on this, we are taking the same budget, but we are estimating to get 30% additional, value out of it in terms of conversions. Like I mentioned, this can be powered by something simple, but it can go all the way into very complex models depending on the amount of factors you wanted to incorporate into your planning and et cetera.
And I think after you've started planning it, or at the same time, if you have many people in your team, now is the time to optimize your website and purchase path for a smooth experience, unless you already have done it. But you want everything to go smoothly during peak season and optimize to the optimal conversion rate to get everything out of those customers you get into the website. So do that now before, if like, for example, Black Friday is your peak season. Now, better than later. Yeah, I had a nice GIF and I forgot about that. So put on your planning hats on for planning the website and your campaigns. Moving on to what to do during peak season. So you're now at the depth of it. It's starting, it's rush, everything's happening. It is a very dynamic time, so you need to be able to adapt your strategy on the fly. So we said you need to plan everything, and you ideally should. But I would also recommend having contingency plans ready. So if something pops up or you want to allocate budget, have a plan of, okay, if this media doesn't work, we'll then move the budget to that, so that then when you see the results, you can make the decisions fast. Which also comes to the fact that you should have clear roles and responsibilities amongst the team to ensure fast response time. So I would know, for example, that it's my responsibility to social media. Let's say Peter is in charge of the website. If something goes wrong with the website, he knows it's his duty and he knows who to contact to get it up and running again. Hopefully nothing happens to any of your campaigns, but still, when you have those clear roles, it is much faster to start fixing things or making changes to your strategy. And then thirdly, which is I think always crucial, but during peak season even more crucial, you need to communicate effectively with the team and with all of your stakeholders and possible partners. So if you are working in a brand and you're working with agencies, have a lot of clear, transparent communication on how the sales started, or, oh, these products could need some boosting or that, and just they can then adapt your strategy or you can adapt your strategy. So just open dialogue on what's happening on both ends.
So another practical example, right? And something to note, before peak season, so the demand forecasting that we showed, that can be met with either a centralized solution or an on-demand solution. During peak season, these two examples, they will heavily utilize kind of live data from the source, so updated hourly or, whatever frequency makes sense for the problem that we're trying to solve. And the first thing I wanted to touch on is something that we have a publicly available template for, which is budget pacing. And before we dive into this, budget pacing, likely most of you have done this, right, is making sure that we spend enough money to get our budget's worth in terms of conversions, but we don't overspend. And having a single place where we can see our progress, right? So we can see, for instance, here, an overview page where we see, okay, this is the start of the month, how many days have passed, how many days are left. Per campaign and per platform, we can see what we have allocated, what we spent so far in terms of what the platform reports as of whenever we refresh this data. And it tells us in one glimpse, are we spending enough? Are we tracking well? We can add some colors in here. And this is quite a useful tool during peak season because it allows you to just at one glance see how's it going, basically. And because there's an automation tool attached to this, it's fairly simple for example, for us to pull in the data and then for you just to say, okay, these campaigns for these specific months, platform, and campaign name, this is what we have in terms of budget. So all you have to do is just fill in the budget for the campaigns that have been pulled in already. And the end result is then this dashboard, right, where we can then see how we're tracking.
Yeah, and I think we've all had that experience of over or underspending, or if there's something happening, like accidentally, it happens like your Facebook account gets blocked for some reason, for suspicious activity or whatever, and nothing's running. So this also helps you to notice these technical issues or human errors if something happened, like someone put on a monthly budget on a daily budget. So,
or you add an extra zero.
Yeah.
Or leave one out.
Yeah. In both cases. So because you want to optimize. Or if you know that for branding campaigns and starting off Christmas season, you want to actually push it in advanced pace so that then you'll keep an eye. You want it constantly to be a little bit over. Great, you're spending it ahead, and then maybe the performance campaign would be a little bit running on a more even pace. So you can keep an eye out on those as well with this.
Perfect. All right. The next example we have is something that's called, it's just a peak season dashboard. And of course, as we go through these, there are many more use cases we can walk through. But what this is, you should be able to see a dashboard in front of you now, is this is something that we build custom, but should be quite simple to do with the on-demand nature of this data. As you're doing the budget pacing, you're making sure you're spending enough. Additionally, we see a lot of value coming out of being able to see, for instance, the times and the frequencies of which our clients actually interact with your ads. So in this example, right, we have this fictitious brand, and we can see, for instance, the cost and the amount of impressions per hour of the day. We can set a date range to just look at our peak season for this year, the last 1 or 2 days, or maybe compare it to last year, and just see, hey, depending on the time of day that our audience interact with our ads, maybe we can optimize a few things in terms of like when and where we're spending, and if we're hitting the right demographics, for instance. And then this can also be, of course, like filtered on a certain campaign name if we want to be very specific, and just making sure that this tracks to what we planned, essentially. So those two hand in hand are, generally speaking, what we see our customers look at during peak season. But of course, there are other examples as well, as like outlier detection or checking that your CTA works and stuff like that. But generally speaking, this is one of the most prominent examples.
And with these type of seasonal peak reporting dashboards, you can build it to be whatever are your needs. It could be also like a sort of you have a workroom, a huge display on the room, and everyone's just on live seeing how much sales, how many products are being sold, which are the top products, and also have your advertising information there as well, how much budget we spend, how much sales, what's the average order value through there, what's the return on ad spend. So you can build it to be custom to your needs and whatever peak seasons you have, and then just have it constantly live in the background so that you can keep an eye on it.
Yeah, exactly. And yet again, simplified example, but you can build it out how you want. Maybe you can even add a order value for a certain time of day when your customers interact with your ads and stuff like that.
So imagination, in a way, is the limit.
Yeah.
So now we have all survived peak season. The dust has settled and we can take a deep breath. The peak is over. You're closing your laptops and pushing them away from the table. No, realistically, I don't recommend that. Also, these are expensive laptops, but you can take a breather. But the work isn't over yet. You want to write your learnings down. So first you need to analyze your campaign performance, and luckily you've gathered all of that data. So you want to look at how each media, each channel performed, which were the best ones, which products sold the most, or which creatives performed the best. Analyze your customer behavior, what audiences drove the best average order value or other relevant KPI to you. And then focus on those learnings, especially on what performed the best, what needed to be improved, and what not to continue. Sort of like a traffic light. So green would be, yes, let's rock and roll with that, let's continue. Yellow, oh, we need to improve a little bit, or maybe next year have more budget on branding or more budget on search. And then red would be, oh, we don't want to be using this anymore. This channel or this creative, this didn't work. We tried a new thing, which I highly recommend. It's a good sign that there's sometimes something on the red zone of let's not continue, because you tried something new, and that's, I think, the key of it. And you remember these learnings now. Let's say for you, peak season is Singles Day, Black Friday, Christmas, mid-season sale, and so on. You remember it after Black Friday, but then starts Christmas, so you need to take maybe a day, write out your initial learnings, and put them down to a report. So we love our dashboards, but also have it in writing somewhere so that you have those numbers, you have the learnings when you start planning next year's peak season. And I'm one of those people, I don't already want to be looking at 2025 peak season, but what you do now helps also next year as well, and the year after that. So we'll go a little bit onto how to do all of this technically, which might be interesting to some of you. You might some be more knowledgeable about Supermetrics, or you've never used Supermetrics before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's dive right into this. So kind of backtracking to where we were earlier during this conversation, right, which is really about your data foundation, making sure you have the right puzzle pieces in place to paint that picture that you need. And essentially that can be done through just collecting the data right from the platforms directly. We have ways to integrate, for example, offline data if you collect anything from TV or out of home or other things that you usually get back at the end of a campaign. And there are certain scenarios where you can just put that straight into a dashboard, on demand or storage based. But a few of the things which we often see add a lot of value are in this kind of box in the middle. We'll go through all of those individually, but basically these are ways to just kind of bring together and segment the data in a way that makes sense when we're looking at it and when we're trying to get insights retrospectively or when we're planning for our next peak season, right? So together with the learnings that you mentioned, this can be used to interpret the data in a way that is much more simple than what the platforms sometimes provide. Yeah. Essentially, just going over them briefly, there are things you can do with an integration platform, for example, like Supermetrics, and do something that you might in Excel or Google Sheets. So I think most of you have done some type of calculated field where you take a campaign name and you split out the taxonomy so you can then look up investment and performance for a certain section of your brand or product or region or market or something, as well as using, for example, sentiment analysis or checking that your names are compliant with the platform's guidelines. So these are kind of things that you can add in here and have that visualized already in the end destination. A thing about combining different data sources. So in some cases, you want to just see a big overview page, right, of your spend and your investment and return, and then have detailed pages below. But to get those platforms all in the same shape that it can be compared to each other, it can be very helpful to do that, for example, upstream and just define like, hey, I want to have these kind of platforms together. They're the same use case. Let's unify, for instance, what cost is called, because some platforms might return it as amount spent, some total spent, some cost, and just kind of unify this. Then, like I mentioned, if you have any campaigns that run outside of digital, but that you want to import into a similar planning document or retrospective performance dashboard, you can import that data this way, and you can work with this imported data the same way as with your digital data. So you can blend it together, you can segment it. And then the last piece would be if you need to store any of this data, especially if you're tracking year-on-year performance, or you just want to retroactively, segment everything, push it into a warehouse, and do something more fancy with it. You can move that into either a warehouse owned by yourself or something that we can provision in this example, right? Supermetric storage, and with one or more of these combinations, or just using everything directly from the source, you can then get to those use cases that we discussed today, but also a lot more if we look at the big picture. And of course, with implementing any of these, most of these can be done yourself, but if you ever have a project that you work on, you're like, hey, scenario planning or anything like that, we're happy to kind of also spar with you and figure out how you can bring that to life in the end.
Yeah, I think there should be create a poll if you want to hear about our premium Supermetrics features. So if you want to learn more how to do these things, especially with Supermetrics, if you're using more of a straight Looker Studio or Google Sheet license, or if you've never used Supermetrics before, click on that. But yeah, sort of wrapping things up before we head to our Q&A. Key takeaways, we talked about data being your superpower. So that is crucial. Preparation is everything. As I said, prepare, plan ahead, but staying agile and adapt. So you can't get too stuck in the way of this was the plan and we're going to follow that. So you need to be adjustable and just never stop learning, test and learn. And yes, you might not have everything ready instantly. It's a journey to get. It's constantly developing. The tools are developing, and everything around us is on just a constant development. So just continue learning. And with that, let's see what if there's any questions. So time for Q&A. Okay, first, which KPIs are you using to measure success? I think overall, for example, at media agency side, we would look at ROAS, so return on advertising spend. That is ideal because then you can look at what is the channel's impact truly through how much conversions, how much sales value it's giving you. But it could be average order value as well if that's something that's interesting to you. I've seen, for example, this type of flexible budgeting type of thing, as long as the ROAS, I don't know how to say that in English, it comes in Finnish, ROAS is above, let's say, 4, you can continue adding on more budget up until if it drops to below 3, for example, and that's when they cut. Of course, it's not unlimited money, there's some cap. But I would say, yeah, ROAS, average order value.
Yeah, I would say those are the general ones that we hear, but of course, depending on your industry and your target for these time periods, it can vary a bit. Yeah. But generally speaking, it's exactly what Outi mentioned. So return on ad spend, average order value, things like that.
Especially if you don't have such a direct like e-commerce, I've seen also bookings or registrations for something during peak season.
Yeah.
But yeah. For the forecasting, the tool, so the sort of budget planning optimizer was just built on Google Sheet. And you could do it in Excel as well if you're in a Microsoft world.
Exactly.
Unlike us. And you can, as Peter said, do it very simply and look at just on the channel level what numbers they give you. So Meta says that we got this many conversions, Google says this many, and then the order value and the sales value, and then calculate your ROAS. Or you can then have more complicated attribution, as mentioned. But yeah, it was built just on Google Sheet with some extra technical skills so that there's actually a selector in there. You can make it simple.
But this one, like Outi mentioned, it's fairly accessible because we just used a Google Sheets plugin, right? We say, give us the data for, the time period that was last year's. Look at the results, and then let's optimize for this year based on what the platform tells us that the return on ad spend was. But as mentioned, you can start collecting data and building your attribution models in a way that makes the most sense to you. So then the more you do that, the more accurate your planning will be in the end.
Yeah.
But there is an infinite ways that you can make this kind of more relevant to you as well.
Yeah, hopefully that answers. Then there was a question of, should we spend more during certain days, like one day before Christmas? I think this is very relevant to your industry and your market. But I would say, for example, for Christmas, and I come from a very much more of a brand background, so I value branding, how that helps then your performance campaign. So in these cases, for example, for Black Friday, if that's key, you could have a big boost when you come out with those offers that you have for that peak season, then maybe a little bit slower in the middle, and then another boost just before. So the same would apply then for Christmas. I could say right after Black Friday, have a burst, then it can quiet down, you can see what the results, and then have another burst. But for example, for Christmas, if there's delivery times that need to be considered, or if it's just something you buy online and it's immediately accessible, that then depends on how you should be doing. If it's something that needs to be delivered, for example, in Finland, there's no one-day delivery, so nothing can be advertised basically one day before Christmas. But gift cards, for example, can.
Indeed.
Great presentation. Can you share some high-level insights from organic lens too for peak season planning? Great question. We were talking a lot about paid media, but I think a lot of these can be applied to organic in the sense of look at your past campaigns or past posts and that season's organic post, what worked well. You can also start test maybe a multiple organic post, push them out, see what is performing, and then repost them again. Especially if you're using TikTok or something that is more dependent on the virality or how well it starts performing and not dependent on when you post it.
All right, cool. So question from Amir. So why do data sources like Awin or Klaviyo have limited metrics or dimensions for pulling data using Supermetrics in Google Sheets? So a high-level answer here. So whenever we build a connection to a data platform, right? Let's say it's a new e-commerce platform or something like that. They will have a public-facing API endpoint that we can build our connectors to, and that's why it exists as a business, right? Depending on the availability of those metrics and dimensions and how that API performs based on what you ask of it, what kind of date range, what kind of insights do I want, that determines then the availability that we can make available in our products. Most of the time, every connector is available in every product that we have. But for some, we need to consider either the performance doesn't make sense, or there's a different reason why not everything is available. Generally speaking, we try to build out everything that the platform has available and make it so that it works for everything. Of course, if you have a very specific use case or question that, hey, I need this and this exact dimension or metric for my use case or report, just feel free to reach out to us and we'll kind of try to make sure that we can give you the most accurate answer possible, like, hey, this is how you do it, or this is how it could be possible, but we need to figure out a way to get that available through this endpoint.
Yeah, I think that was all the questions, and we do want to promote our upcoming Super Summit, which is coming up on October 24th, and depending on your time zone at different times. And what can you hear at Super Summit?
Well, so we just covered peak season reporting, but Super Summit is more of a broad event where we talk about the marketing analytics industry as a whole, and we have guest speakers from major tech companies and kind of our customer advisory board as well, who do a bit more of a broad, I would say, overview of things, and hopefully those are useful kind of beyond a single use case, right? So it's more of a general industry talk.
For example, I'll be there talking with Google Cloud about marketing measurement. So if you are interested in that, for example, come and register and listen to me more if you didn't get enough now. But other than that, I think we are all set, and we just want to say thank you for participating and good luck on your peak seasons. And as said, may the odds ever be in your favor.